The first round struck the Taliban commander in his left eye socket, traveling at 2,250 feet per second. Before his body collapsed, the second shot found the radio operator beside him, severing his connection to reinforcements. The third, fourth, and fifth rounds eliminated the heavy weapons team on the ridge above. 8 more shots followed in rapid succession, each finding its mark with devastating precision. 12 targets, 12 kills. The final round was still traveling through the thin mountain air when the Taliban ambush collapsed into chaos. In the blood-red dust of Afghanistan's Korangal Valley, 2009, a Marine MARSOC team had been moments from annihilation. Pinned down by a superior force, their team leader wounded, communications compromised. Then, from a rocky outcrop 900 yards away, death had arrived with mechanical precision. Not from the designated marksman, he'd taken shrapnel 2 days prior. The shots came from Morgan Walker, a 25-year-old female Marine temporarily assigned from logistics. The after-action report remained classified. Her contribution listed only as support personnel attached. The recommendation for a Bronze Star, written by the team sergeant, never made it past Kandahar. Some said a woman couldn't handle the pressure of combat sniping. Morgan Walker had proven otherwise, though the record of her achievement remained buried in classified files. 3 years later, the California sun beat down on Camp Pendleton's Range 218 as morning fog burned away from the hills. Staff Sergeant Richard Blackwood, the Armory NCOIC, stood by the qualification roster, tapping it with thick, weathered fingers. At 50, with 3 combat tours and salt and pepper hair cropped tight to regulation, Blackwood wore his authority like armor. "Listen up, gentlemen." His voice carried deliberately across the assembly area, pitched to reach the lone female lance corporal standing 20 yards away. "Command thinks we need diversity in our scout sniper support element, so they sent us someone from logistics to observe." Laughter rippled through the assembled Marines. Blackwood's Texas drawl thickened for effect. "Maybe she can count our brass when we're done." More laughter. Morgan Walker kept her face neutral, eyes fixed on the morning fog rolling across the California hills. At 28, 5'6", with calloused hands and shoulders hardened from years of disciplined practice, she stood motionless, watching the mist swirl. The only sign of her awareness was a slight tightening around her eyes. What the men joking at the board didn't know was that Lance Corporal Morgan Walker had been hand-loading precision ammunition since she was 12 years old in her grandfather's Montana workshop. They didn't know that just 3 days ago, she'd been transferred from the Marine Corps shooting team at Quantico with orders that came directly from division. They didn't know her service record showed only basic qualifications because her real achievements were buried under security classifications that even Blackwood couldn't access. And they certainly didn't know that their little game was about to backfire spectacularly. Morgan watched as Blackwood handed out boxes of Lake City match-grade ammunition to his shooters. Each man received 50 rounds, carefully packaged and sealed. When she'd reported to draw her ammunition that morning, Blackwood had looked at her as though she'd wandered into the wrong building. "Support personnel don't rate match ammo," he'd said, tossing her a box of standard ball ammunition. "These rounds are allocated for designated marksmen and scout snipers only." His Corporal Jenkins had snickered from behind the cage. "Maybe you can help with brass collection after the real shooters finish." Morgan had shown her range authorization, signed by Captain Torres himself. Blackwood had simply shrugged and claimed there must be an administrative error. "File a request through S4. Should only take a couple days to process." His smile hadn't reached his eyes. "Oh wait, the qualification is today. Bad timing." Now, as the morning sun began to burn through the coastal fog, Morgan walked back to her vehicle, boots crunching on the gravel parking area. Her hands remained steady. They had remained steady in worse situations. In the privacy of her government-issue SUV, she retrieved a locked steel container holding 40 match-grade handloads she'd assembled herself using components purchased with her own money. Perfectly within regulations, kept secured as personal competition rounds. Behind her, a throat cleared. Morgan turned to find Gunnery Sergeant James Harrison, the range safety officer, watching her with an unreadable expression. At 68, with pale blue eyes that had seen more than most men ever would, He'd been in uniform since Korea, refusing retirement 3 times. Problem with your issued ammunition, Lance Corporal? No, Gunny. Just supplementing with my competition loads. Harrison studied her for a moment, then glanced at the ammunition in her hand. Sierra Match King hollow points, Lake City brass, Federal primers. His eyes narrowed slightly. Custom loads. Yes, Gunny. Hand-loaded. Since I was 12, Gunny. Something shifted in Harrison's weathered face. Not quite a smile, but a subtle relaxation around the eyes. Where'd you learn that particular skill, Walker? My father. He was particular about his ammunition. Harrison nodded slowly. Must have been quite the marksman. He was, Gunny, before he came to America. Harrison's eyes sharpened with interest. And where was that? Poland, Gunny. He defected in 1981. The old Marine studied her face for a long moment. Something like recognition flickered in his eyes. Misha Walkowski. Morgan couldn't hide her surprise. You knew my father? Harrison glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. Berlin, 1979. He spoke so quietly Morgan had to lean forward to hear him. I was on overwatch for a diplomatic meeting. He was on an adjacent rooftop, 500 meters east, Soviet sector. Morgan felt her breath catch. Her father had never spoken of Berlin. Harrison continued, his voice still low. I had him in my crosshairs for 3 hours. He had me in his. Neither of us took the shot. Why? The question escaped before Morgan could stop it. Too many civilians in the kill zone. At least that's what my report said. Harrison's eyes held hers. Your father was Sparrow program, wasn't he? Morgan kept her face carefully neutral. The Sparrow program was never mentioned in her home, though she'd pieced together fragments over the years. An elite Warsaw Pact sniper unit trained to eliminate high-value Western targets during the Cold War. Her father had been one of their best before he risked everything to defect. I wouldn't know, Gunny. Harrison nodded once, accepting her non-answer. Colonel Miller will be observing the afternoon session. Word is he's scouting talent for something special. What kind of special, Gunny? The kind that doesn't exist on paper. Harrison turned to go, then paused. Walker. Yes, Gunny? Your father taught you how to read wind? Yes, Gunny. Everything he knew. Then you might want to use position 8 on the line. Best vantage for the Mirage when the thermal layers start shifting after noon. With that, he walked away. Her father had never mentioned Berlin, never mentioned a Marine sniper who had had him in his sights. Never mentioned a day when 2 enemies had silently agreed to preserve life rather than take it. Morgan approached the arms rack where the range rifles were stored. At the end stood a dusty M40A1, serial number 15847, with a repaired crack in the stock. 2 weeks earlier, during routine maintenance, she'd cleaned this rifle thoroughly, noting its excellent barrel, despite the cosmetic damage. I wouldn't take that one if I were you. Morgan turned to find Corporal Daniels from motor transport standing nearby. Unlike the others, his expression held no mockery. Stock's cracked, he continued. Been repaired, but still. I checked it last week during maintenance. The barrel's good. That's what matters, Daniels nodded. Heard about Blackwood's ammunition games. Not the first time. Morgan raised an eyebrow in question. My sister went through artillery school last year. Similar reception. Daniels glanced toward Blackwood, who was demonstrating proper cheek weld to a young PFC. Some things change slower than others in the Corps. You spotting for anyone today? Daniels asked. Morgan shook her head. I've got decent eyes if you need a spotter. Blackwood's boys won't help. I'd appreciate that, Corporal. By 1300 hours, word had spread that the female Lance Corporal intended to shoot the qualification despite Blackwood's ammunition games. Some Marines gathered to watch what they assumed would be an embarrassing failure. Others, mostly junior enlisted who had dealt with Blackwood's favoritism, quietly hoped she'd surprise everyone. Heat waves shimmered above the sun-baked earth, creating mirage conditions that would challenge even experienced shooters. Wind flags snapped in the sea breeze, indicating a steady 8-knot crosswind with occasional gusts to 12. Morgan settled into position 8, as Gunny Harrison had suggested. The lane offered a clear view of the mirage effects, allowing her to read the wind with precision. She prepared her position meticulously, establishing a stable shooting platform. Daniel settled in beside her with a spotting scope. First string is 600 yards. Prone supported, 10 rounds in 10 minutes. Morgan nodded, loading 5 of her hand loads into the magazine. Each cartridge was identical in weight and dimension, the brass gleaming from careful preparation. Every round a testament to her father's teachings about consistency and precision. Blackwood announced the afternoon relay over the loudspeaker. Attention on the firing line. Colonel Miller will be observing this qualification relay. All designated shooters, you have 15 minutes for final preparation. He emphasized the word designated like a challenge, his eyes finding Morgan at her position. A staff car pulled up to the range control tower. Colonel William Miller stepped out, a tall figure in desert camouflage. The battalion sergeant major accompanied him. From her position, Morgan could see Blackwood gesturing toward the firing line, no doubt explaining the qualification course and highlighting his top shooters. Miller nodded politely, but his eyes scanned the entire line, pausing briefly on Morgan at position 8. Ready on the right, ready on the left, ready on the firing line. Commence fire. 20 rifles cracked in near unison. Morgan held her fire, watching the mirage through her scope, reading the subtle patterns that revealed the true wind conditions. Blackwood's shooters held the left edge, letting the wind drift their round center mass, a textbook approach taught in sniper school. But the wind wasn't uniform today. Morgan could see thermal layers creating variable conditions that would push rounds unpredictably if you followed the textbook. She squeezed the trigger on her exhale. The rifle punched against her shoulder. Through her scope, she saw the round impact dead center. Center X, Daniels confirmed through the spotting scope. Hold same wind call. 9 more shots, each delivered with methodical precision, each landing within an inch of the others, creating a tight group that could be covered with a playing card. Lane 8, perfect score. 10 out of 10 in the X-ring, the range officer announced, surprise evident in his voice. Colonel Miller walked over personally to verify the target through his spotting scope. Jenkins, Blackwood's star pupil, managed 9 in the black with 7 in the X-ring, the best among Blackwood's group. Second string, 800 yards, prone unsupported, 10 rounds in 12 minutes. At this distance, the standard ammunition's inconsistency began showing among Blackwood's shooters. Despite solid fundamentals, their rounds showed vertical stringing, the hallmark of ammunition with variable powder charges. Morgan's hand loads maintained their precision. The greater distance merely required more careful calculation, accounting for the bullet's longer flight time and the increased effect of gravity and wind. Wind shifting, Daniels murmured. 3 minutes left, coming from 10 o'clock now, maybe 9 MPO. Morgan had already noted the change in the mirage pattern. She adjusted her hold slightly right and sent her final 3 rounds downrange. All struck within the X-ring, completing another perfect string. When the targets were pulled, Blackwood's face had darkened. Colonel Miller was now openly watching Morgan, his interest no longer disguised. The final string would be the most challenging. 900 yards, prone position, with the afternoon wind now gusting unpredictably. At this distance, even experienced snipers struggled to maintain tight groups under changing conditions. As Morgan prepared for the final string, she felt Gunny Harrison watching her. He gave her a nearly imperceptible nod before moving on. Morgan loaded her magazine with the last of her hand loads. Each round represented her father's legacy, his insistence on excellence. The wind shifted between 10 and 2 o'clock. Morgan caught each change in the mirage 3 seconds before it reached the targets, adjusting her hold while others were still compensating for the previous condition. Her fundamentals were flawless, each shot breaking exactly as intended. Through her scope, she watched her rounds impact, all within the black, 8 of 10 in the X-ring. When the final targets were pulled, Colonel Miller ordered Blackwood to report immediately after the qualification ended. As the range was cleared and rifles cleaned, Corporal Jenkins stood awkwardly beside Morgan. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" The question held genuine curiosity rather than the earlier mockery. "Montana," Morgan replied, continuing to clean her rifle. "My father taught me. Your old man must have been one hell of a shooter." Before Morgan could respond, Blackwood appeared, his face tight with barely controlled anger. Jenkins! Range police call now. Jenkins moved away quickly. Blackwood turned to Morgan, lowering his voice. Enjoy your moment, Walker, but this doesn't change anything. Women don't belong in combat arms, especially not in scout sniper platoons. Morgan continued cleaning her rifle, her movements precise and unhurried. Seems like the colonel might disagree. Blackwood leaned closer. You think you impressed him with your little show? Let me tell you something about combat sniping, Princess. It's not just about hitting targets on a known distance range, it's about enduring conditions that would break most men. Morgan finally looked up, meeting his gaze. Like in the Korangal Valley? 4 months with Marsoc? 12 targets during the ambush at Objective Wolverine? Blackwood's face went slack with shock. How did you— I was there, Staff Sergeant. I was the support personnel attached in the classified report. I made those shots. Before Blackwood could recover, Gunny Harrison approached. Colonel wants to see both of you. Now. Colonel Miller waited in the range control tower, studying the day's qualification scores. The sergeant major stood beside him. Staff Sergeant Blackwood, Lance Corporal Walker. Sir, I can explain the ammunition allocation, Blackwood began. I'm sure you can, Miller interrupted, finally looking up from the score sheets. But first, I'd like to hear Lance Corporal Walker's explanation for why she's not on your battalion competition team with groups like these. Sir, she's newly assigned from logistics. I transferred from the Marine Corps shooting team at Quantico 3 days ago, Colonel, Morgan interjected. Before that, I was temporarily assigned to Marsoc in Afghanistan. Miller's eyes showed recognition. Objective Wolverine. Yes, sir. Miller turned to Blackwood. Did you know about Lance Corporal Walker's background, Staff Sergeant? No, sir. Her record showed basic qualifications only. And that justified denying her proper ammunition for today's qualification. Match ammunition is allocated for designated marksmen and scout snipers only, sir. Support personnel don't rate. Lance Corporal Walker's transfer orders came with my signature block, Staff Sergeant. Miller's voice hardened. Those orders specifically designated her as scout sniper qualified. I never saw those orders, sir. Miller turned to his aide, who produced a folder. Sergeant Major, please investigate how transfer orders with my signature failed to reach Staff Sergeant Blackwood's desk. Aye, sir. Miller returned his attention to Morgan. Those were hand loads you were using today, correct, Lance Corporal? Yes, sir. Personal competition loads. Trained by your father, Misha Walkowski. Morgan couldn't hide her surprise. You knew my father, sir? By reputation only. His defection created quite a stir in certain circles. Miller studied her for a moment. He was Sparrow Program, elite Warsaw packed snipers, some of the best in the world during the Cold War. Morgan remained silent, uncertain how much to acknowledge. Miller continued, Your shooting today showed techniques I've only seen in intelligence reports about Sparrow snipers. The way you read mirage patterns, your wind calls between gusts, not standard Marine Corps doctrine. My father taught me everything he knew, sir. Blackwood looked between them, confusion evident on his face. Staff Sergeant Blackwood, effective immediately, you're relieved of your duties as Armory NCOIC. Miller's tone left no room for argument. Report to the Sergeant Major tomorrow at 0700 for reassignment. Sir, with all due respect, that will be all, Staff Sergeant. Dismissed. When the door closed, Miller turned back to Morgan. Lance Corporal, what I'm about to discuss is classified top secret. Sergeant Major, please secure the room. The Sergeant Major moved to lock the door and close the blinds. Miller opened a folder marked with classified cover sheets. Have you heard of Project Galileo? No, sir. It's a special task force being assembled to address a specific threat. The collapse of the Soviet Union has created a dangerous situation. Nuclear weapons materials and expertise are suddenly available to the highest bidder. Morgan listened carefully, uncertain why she was being included in this briefing. Miller continued, We have intelligence suggesting that certain former Soviet officers are brokering deals with hostile nations and terrorist organizations. Among them is Colonel Alexei Volkov, former KGB and the man who ran the Sparrow program. Morgan felt her breath catch. She'd heard that name in whispered conversations between her parents years ago. Volkov trained your father, didn't he? My father never spoke of his trainers, sir. But he taught you their techniques. Miller's statement wasn't a question. We need those skills, Lance Corporal. Project Galileo requires snipers with capabilities beyond standard military training. Sir, are you recruiting me for a classified task force? I'm offering you a chance to help prevent nuclear terrorism. Miller's eyes held hers, using skills that might have otherwise gone unrecognized in the regular Marine Corps structure. Gunny Harrison spoke for the first time. Your father defected because he believed in freedom, Walker. Volkov is threatening that freedom by selling Soviet nuclear secrets to the highest bidder. Morgan looked at the old Marine. Surprised. You seem to know a lot about my father, Gunny. Berlin, 1979. Harrison's weathered face softened slightly. Your father had me dead to rights from his position. Could have taken the shot. Chose not to. Why? Too many civilians in the crossfire. He made the moral choice even when his orders likely said otherwise. Harrison exchanged a glance with Miller. That's why the colonel thinks you're right for this. Miller nodded. We need someone who understands Sparrow techniques but operates with American values. Someone who can anticipate Volkov's moves because they understand his training methods. Morgan absorbed this information slowly. What exactly would this assignment entail, sir? Initially, training. You'd help develop a counter-sniper program based on your father's techniques. Eventually, field operations tracking Volkov's network. I'm interested, sir, Miller nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Good. Report to my office tomorrow at 800 for preliminary briefing. As Morgan left the range control tower, the setting sun cast long shadows across Camp Pendleton. Gunny Harrison fell into step beside her as she walked toward the parking area. Your father would be proud, he said quietly. Morgan glanced at the old Marine. You really knew him, didn't you? We were counterparts, different sides of the same Cold War. Harrison's voice carried decades of experience. He was the best I ever encountered, until today. Morgan stopped walking. What do you mean? Your 900-yard string, wind shifting between 10 and 2 o'clock. Most shooters were compensating after the fact. You were anticipating the shifts before they happened. Harrison's pale blue eyes studied her. That's not taught in any Marine Corps sniper school. That's Sparrow program methodology. My father called it reading the air between worlds. Harrison nodded. The Russians had a different understanding of ballistics. Less dependent on technology, more on human intuition. Your father combined both approaches. So do you. They resumed walking in silence for several moments before Harrison spoke again. Project Galileo isn't just about counter-sniper operations. It's about preventing the nuclear black market from emerging in the post-Soviet chaos. Why me, Gunny? There are better shooters out there. Better shooters, maybe, but none who understand Volkov's methods from the inside. Harrison's voice dropped lower. Your father didn't just defect on principle, Walker. He defected because Volkov was pushing the Sparrow program beyond acceptable limits, targeting civilians, diplomats, journalists. Your father drew a moral line. Morgan absorbed this information silently. Her father had rarely spoken of his life before America, but his nightmares had sometimes revealed the toll his past had taken. Mitchell believes Volkov is selling more than just weapons, Harrison continued. He's selling expertise, training, creating a new generation of Sparrows loyal to whoever pays the most. The next morning, Morgan reported to Building 87, a nondescript structure on the eastern edge of the base that officially housed communications equipment. Inside, the building bore little resemblance to standard military facilities. The central area contained a tactical operations center with multiple secure communication stations, satellite feeds, and intelligence analysis workstations. Gunny Harrison introduced her to a specialized rifle unlike any in standard inventory. The Amalgam, he explained, designed to your father's specifications in '85 after he consulted with our sniper development program. Macmillan action, custom barrel, but the stock. He ran his hand along the wooden furniture. Mohsen Nagant inspired. Morgan noted, feeling the distinctive shape. Your father called it the amalgam, Harrison said quietly. East and West merged into something better than either alone. Morgan was introduced to Sergeants Jenkins and Rivera, selected for specialized training in counter-sparrow techniques. Both proved apt pupils as Morgan began teaching them her father's methods. Conventional sniper doctrine teaches you to read wind flags, watch vegetation, estimate based on feel, she explained. Sparrow methodology teaches you to read the thermal layers in the air itself. Their training was interrupted when Colonel Miller called an emergency briefing. Satellite imagery showed a sniper attack in Chechnya. 2 UN observers eliminated at 1,800 yards through weather conditions that should have made the shot impossible. Sparrow techniques, Harrison confirmed. Reading atmospheric layers, calculating multivariable effects. The shooter left a calling card, Miller added. Star with wings carved into a fence post at the firing position. The sparrow emblem, Morgan realized. A deliberate signal. There's more. Miller handed her a sealed evidence bag containing a single brass casing. Not standard military issue, but hand-loaded with meticulous precision. Along the casing's side, barely visible without magnification, was a tiny engraving. Manu W. My father's initials. A message, Harrison said quietly. For you. Morgan felt the weight of implications settling on her shoulders. Somehow Volkov had learned of her involvement in Project Galileo almost immediately. 12 hours later, intelligence intercepted a communication from a known Volkov associate. The Russian speech translated by subtitles on the screen. The sparrow's daughter flies on borrowed wings. She can be taught to land properly, or she can fall like her father. He's recruiting you, observed Peterson from the CIA, while simultaneously threatening you. He's also telling us he has more information about my father's death than we do, Morgan noted. Miller nodded grimly. Dr. Levski has reviewed your father's medical records. He believes the cancer that killed him was indeed induced. A specialized radioactive compound developed by Department 12 of the KGB, Volkov's former division. The confirmation landed like physical weight on Morgan's shoulders. Her father hadn't simply died. He had been assassinated through means so sophisticated they had appeared natural. Intelligence suggests Volkov is planning a major demonstration within 2 weeks, Miller continued, moving to a tactical display of a compound in Kazakhstan. We believe it involves a long-distance precision strike against a high-value target, possibly with a specialized payload. Nuclear? Morgan asked, the word hanging heavily in the air. That's our working assumption, Peterson confirmed. Low-yield tactical device delivered via precision shot rather than conventional means. Impossible to trace back to the originating nation. Our mission parameters have changed, Miller announced. We're mounting a direct action operation to neutralize Volkov's network before this demonstration can occur. He turned to Morgan. You're the key to this operation, Lance Corporal. What exactly would you have me do, sir? Lead the sniper element of our strike team. You, Jenkins, and Rivera, supported by a tactical element. He'll be expecting something like this, Morgan noted, studying the compound layout. Counting on it, Harrison interjected. But he'll be expecting conventional tactics, Western approach. We'll be using his own methods against him. Over the next 48 hours, the team prepared for deployment. Morgan studied everything available on Volkov, building a mental model of his operational patterns and training methodologies. The message he had sent was clear. Join him or face her father's fate. But there was a third option, one that would honor her father's legacy while preventing Volkov from selling his deadly expertise. 16 hours after departure from Camp Pendleton, the MC-130 began its approach to the drop zone, a remote area of steppe near the Kazakhstan-Russian border. Under the cover of pre-dawn darkness, Morgan and her team parachuted into the desolate landscape. Their canopies, designed for minimal visual and radar profile, guided them to a precise landing in a shallow ravine 5 kilometers from their initial rally point. They moved only at night, concealing themselves during daylight hours beneath camouflage netting designed to defeat both visual and thermal detection. On the third day, they reached their final observation position, a ridgeline overlooking Volkov's compound from approximately 1,800 meters. Classic sparrow positioning, Harrison murmured as they established their hide site within a natural depression in the rocky terrain. Maximum environmental awareness while maintaining minimal signature. Through their spotting scopes, they conducted initial surveillance of the compound. The facility appeared as intelligence had indicated, a central building surrounded by several smaller structures, all protected by a perimeter fence patrolled by armed guards. Target building is the central structure, Harrison indicated. Intelligence places Volkov's office and living quarters on the top floor, north side. Morgan studied the surrounding terrain, reading the atmospheric conditions between their position and the target. The morning air was cool but would warm rapidly as the sun rose higher, creating thermal layers that would affect bullet trajectory. Wind moved across the steppe in complex patterns, channeled by the surrounding hills into currents that conventional snipers would find nearly impossible to calculate. Perfect conditions for Sparrow methodology, she observed. He's created an environment that requires his techniques to operate effectively. The team settled into methodical observation, documenting personnel movements, security rotations, and environmental patterns. As the sun reached its zenith, a figure emerged onto a balcony of the main building, tall, straight-backed, with steel-gray hair cropped short. Even at this distance, Morgan recognized Alexei Volkov from his dossier photographs. Target confirmed, Jenkins murmured. Range 1783 meters, elevation 12 meters above our position. Morgan observed Volkov through her scope, noting the precision of his movements, the alertness in his bearing despite his age. This was a man who had survived decades of Cold War intrigue. We have authorization to eliminate the target immediately upon positive identification, Harrison reminded them. Primary shooter, call it when you're ready. As primary shooter, the decision fell to Morgan, but something held her back. He's expecting us, she said quietly. This is staged. Harrison studied the target through his own optics. Agreed. Too exposed, too perfect. He switched to thermal imaging. And I'm seeing something odd. His heat signature is uniform. Decoy, Jenkins concluded. Sophisticated, but not actual body heat distribution. Volkov had anticipated their arrival and their potential firing position, placing a realistic decoy to draw their fire and reveal their location. If he's expecting us from this direction, Morgan began. Then he's watching this ridgeline, Harrison finished. We need to relocate, carefully. They withdrew from their observation position with practiced stealth, moving laterally along the ridgeline before descending to a secondary position they had identified during planning. This location offered a different angle on the compound, though at a slightly greater range, nearly 2,100 meters. Extreme distance, Rivera noted. Beyond conventional effective range, Morgan replied, but within Sparrow methodology parameters. As dusk approached, the compound came alive with activity. Vehicles arrived carrying what appeared to be potential clients, representatives from nations and organizations interested in Volkov's specialized services. The demonstration is happening tonight, Harrison observed, earlier than intelligence suggested. Morgan focused her attention on a separate structure near the main building, a shooting range with targets set at various distances across the steppe. Through her specialized optics, she could see that the furthest targets were positioned at extreme ranges, well beyond conventional sniper capabilities. They're going to showcase the Sparrow-trained shooters, she concluded, demonstrate their ability to deliver precision fire under complex conditions. New timeline, Harrison decided. We need to neutralize Volkov before the demonstration begins. Tactical team will initiate their approach at full darkness, approximately 90 minutes from now. As the sun set behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the steppe, Morgan prepared the amalgam for its mission. Each round was meticulously checked, the optics calibrated to the changing atmospheric conditions. Just as she completed her preparations, Rivera spotted new movement through his thermal imaging scope. Vehicle approaching from the northeast, not using established roads. Morgan shifted her attention to the approaching vehicle, a rugged off-road truck moving with deliberate purpose toward a secondary entrance to the compound. Not one of Volkov's regular security vehicles, Harrison noted, checking it against their intelligence file. Different profile. As the vehicle drew closer, Morgan focused on the driver visible through her specialized optics, despite the growing darkness. "Staff Sergeant Blackwood," she said, the recognition sending a chill through her body. "Confirm?" Harrison asked sharply. "Confirmed. Staff Sergeant Richard Blackwood. He's approaching the compound security checkpoint." The implications were immediate and disturbing. Blackwood had been reassigned, supposedly en route to San Diego when they departed. His presence here, approaching Volkov's compound with apparent authorization, revealed a security breach far more significant than they had anticipated. "He's our leak," Harrison concluded. "How Volkov knew about you, about Project Galileo." "But why?" Rivera asked. "Blackwood's career was solid. Distinguished service record." "It's more than money," Morgan said, remembering Miller's dossier on Blackwood. "His brother died in an operation where intelligence failed. He blamed the system, felt betrayed by it. So he betrayed it in return," Harrison concluded, "fed information to Volkov, probably through intermediaries at first." The tactical situation had just grown significantly more complex. Blackwood knew their capabilities, their equipment, their tactics. He could provide Volkov with insights that would counter their advantage. "Change of plans," Harrison decided. "Primary target is now the demonstration equipment and nuclear materials. Secondary target is Volkov. Blackwood becomes tertiary target of opportunity." As full darkness descended, the tactical team began their approach to the compound perimeter. Morgan, Jenkins, and Rivera established firing positions covering different sectors, prepared to provide precision support as needed. Through her night vision equipment, Morgan watched the tactical team move with ghost-like efficiency across the open terrain. Using the minimal available cover with expert skill, they reached the perimeter fence without detection. "Overwatch, this is Tango Leader," came the whispered communication. "Perimeter breached, moving to primary objective." Morgan acknowledged, then returned her attention to scanning the compound. The main building now glowed with activity. Its windows illuminated as Volkov entertained his potential clients. On the specialized range, technicians prepared equipment for the demonstration. Then, without warning, floodlights blazed across the compound, bathing the perimeter in harsh white light. Alarms sounded, and security personnel moved with practiced precision toward defensive positions. "Compromise," Tango Leader reported urgently. "They knew we were coming. Fall back to secondary positions." But it was too late. The tactical team found themselves caught in coordinated fire from multiple security positions, their retreat paths blocked by pre-positioned assets. "They're being herded," Harrison realized, driven toward a kill zone. Morgan shifted her scope toward the main building, where a figure now stood observing the operation from a rooftop position. Alexei Volkov. Not a decoy this time, watching as his security forces executed a plan he had prepared in advance. Beside him stood Blackwood, pointing toward the ridgeline where they had established their initial observation post. "He's directing them to our position," Morgan reported, a cold certainty settling in her chest. "He anticipated our entire approach." Harrison made a rapid decision. "Change of mission. We need to extract the tactical team." Jenkins, Rivera, established suppressive fire on the security positions to the east and west. "Walker, you're on Volkov," Morgan acknowledged, shifting her aim to the rooftop where Volkov stood. The range was extreme, 278 meters according to her rangefinder. The atmospheric conditions were complex, with multiple thermal layers between her position and the target. Wind moved across the steppe in patterns that would make conventional calculations useless. A shot that would require everything her father had taught her. Every technique from both Eastern and Western traditions. A shot at the very edge of human capability. She settled into position, controlling her breathing as her father had taught her. Slow inhale, slower exhale. Pause. The world narrowed to the essentials. Wind, distance, bullet path. Through her specialized optics, Morgan could see the thermal layers shifting between her position and the target. She read their patterns, calculating their combined effect. Not just the surface wind, but all the invisible currents between her and Volkov, reading the air between worlds. Morgan adjusted her aim to account for all variables: wind at multiple layers, gravity over the extreme distance, air density variations, humidity, The Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation, even the slight temperature differences between the cooling step and the illuminated compound. As she prepared to take the shot, a memory surfaced, her father teaching her to load ammunition in their Montana workshop, his calloused hands guiding hers through the precise motions. "A bullet is just a messenger," he had told her. "What matters is the message it carries." Morgan squeezed the trigger on her exhale, feeling the amalgam pulse against her shoulder. Through the scope, she watched the round travel across the immense distance, its path affected by all the atmospheric variables she had calculated. Time seemed to slow as the bullet crossed the space between worlds, her world and Volkov's, carrying its message of justice long delayed. The round struck Volkov's center mass, the impact throwing him backward on the rooftop. Blackwood dropped to a defensive position, scanning frantically for the source of the shot. "Target down," Morgan reported clinically, shifting to support tactical team extraction. Jenkins and Rivera had established effective suppressive fire, creating corridors through which the tactical team could withdraw. Morgan joined their effort, engaging security positions with precision fire that forced Volkov's personnel to seek cover rather than pursue the retreating Americans. Tango leader reports 4 mobile, 2 casualties, Harrison updated. Extraction proceeding to Rally Point Alpha. As the tactical team disengaged from the compound, Morgan noticed new movement on the rooftop. Blackwood was kneeling beside Volkov, who was somehow still conscious despite the devastating impact. Volkov gripped Blackwood's arm, speaking urgently. "Volkov is still alive," Morgan reported, adjusting her aim for a follow-up shot. Before she could fire, another figure appeared on the rooftop, a shooter with a specialized rifle similar to the amalgam. The newcomer raised his weapon, aiming not at the retreating Americans but at Blackwood. Through her scope, Morgan watched as the shooter executed Blackwood with a single shot to the head, following Volkov's final order. The betrayer betrayed in turn, his usefulness ended. "Blackwood is down," Morgan reported. "New shooter on the rooftop appears to be Volkov's successor." Harrison processed this information quickly. "Can you engage?" Morgan had already adjusted her aim, calculating the new variables for the rooftop shooter who now knelt beside Volkov, receiving what appeared to be final instructions. "Engaging," she confirmed, then took the shot. The round struck true, eliminating the successor and completing the mission's primary objective of disrupting Volkov's leadership structure. But the damage had been done. The tactical team had been unable to reach the specialized equipment or nuclear materials. The demonstration might be delayed but not prevented entirely. "Full withdrawal," Harrison ordered. "Rally with tactical team at extraction point." The team executed a textbook withdrawal, moving across the steppe with the same disciplined stealth that had marked their approach. They linked up with the surviving members of the tactical team at the designated rally point. As dawn broke over the Kazakhstan horizon, Morgan watched the landscape pass by from their extraction vehicle, processing the events of the operation. They had succeeded in their primary mission of neutralizing Volkov and disrupting his organization. The nuclear demonstration had been prevented, at least temporarily. Upon their return to Camp Pendleton, Colonel Miller conducted the formal debriefing in the secure confines of Building 87. "Your shot on Volkov will enter the classified records as one of the most significant eliminations in intelligence history," Miller began, though, of course, officially, it never happened. Morgan nodded, understanding the paradox of their shadow operations. "More importantly," Miller continued, "you've completed what your father began in Berlin. He made a moral choice that ultimately led to his death, but also to the preservation of countless innocent lives. You honored that choice while ensuring Volkov can never harm anyone else." He opened a secure file on his desk, removing a single photograph. An old image of her father standing beside a younger Harrison, both in civilian clothes, examining what appeared to be an early prototype of the amalgam rifle. "This was taken in 1985 during your father's consultation with our sniper development program." Miller handed her the photograph. "Harrison thought you should have it, the only known image of their collaboration after Berlin." Morgan studied the photograph, noting the relaxed posture between the two men, former adversaries who had found common ground in their shared expertise and values. "I'm offering you a permanent position with the project," Miller said. not as a lance corporal, but as a specialized operator with equivalent rank to captain for operational purposes. You would lead the sniper element of our direct action capability while continuing to train others in Sparrow methodologies. I accept, sir, Morgan said simply. 6 months later, Morgan stood before a class of 12 operators selected for specialized training in counter-Sparrow techniques. Among them were 3 women navigating the same challenges she had faced in a male-dominated profession. Conventional sniper doctrine teaches you to read wind flags, watch vegetation, estimate based on feel, she began, echoing the words she had used to instruct Jenkins and Rivera before the Kazakhstan operation. What I'm going to teach you goes beyond that. To read the air between worlds, to understand the invisible currents that affect every shot. On the wall behind her hung a group image of Project Galileo's growing team. Jenkins and Rivera stood among the instructors, their experience in Kazakhstan having earned them permanent positions in the program. And in the corner of the classroom, displayed in a specially designed case, rested the rifle with serial number 15847, the M40A1 that Morgan had used on the Camp Pendleton range to demonstrate her skills. The weapon had become something of a legend within the classified program. Someone had scratched Walker's rifle into the inside of the stock, echoing the legacy of her father and the skills he had passed down. Skills that had originated in the Sparrow program but had been transformed by moral purpose and American values into something that protected rather than threatened. As Morgan instructed her students in the specialized techniques that would allow them to counter the next generation of threats, she felt her father's presence in every word, every demonstration, the air between worlds, between East and West, between past and present, between father and daughter, carried more than bullets. It carried legacy, purpose, and the enduring hope that skills developed for war could ultimately serve peace. And somewhere in that invisible space, Misha Walkowski's choice in Berlin continued to ripple outward, touching lives he would never know through the daughter who carried his knowledge forward.